Welcome to another episode of CEX Talks. Today I have Kish Sharma. That's how he likes to be called. CEO and co-founder of Bling. In this podcast, we talk about what are the developments in terms of customer and employee experience in the contact center industry. We all know this is an era where 30 to 45% annual agent turnover is the norm, if not more. And in many geographies, this can be almost 100%. Turnover, for the year. Yet most organizations still treat hiring as a reactive administrative task rather than a strategic differentiator it has become. And that's where, we find out, more from Kish, who has been focused specifically on solving this problem for the industry. Kish, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Abhi. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. And I think the timing is so good that, while as a business, we are putting a heavy focus on solving for the hard problem around high volume hiring, you have thoughts which kind of resonates with me. And very happy to talk further about this as we progress there. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on the show.
No, absolutely my pleasure. So, Kish, let's start with your journey a bit. Okay, let the audience know you. You were kind of started on the technical side of things and then you became an entrepreneur yourself a couple of years back. So talk to our audience a bit about this. What was that aha moment, which I'm always very interested in, where one says, okay, I'm hanging up my corporate shoes today. And from tomorrow, I will be an entrepreneur. And then how do your family take it?
Sure. I think the second question is very important. I'll get to that. But quick background about myself. So I was born and raised in India in a small city called Udaipur. And then I moved to the US in 2014 to do my grad school. I went to Georgia Tech to study industrial engineering, operations research. So basically a lot of math. In 2015, I moved to the Valley and started working for big techs, starting from semiconductor to B2B SaaS. I last worked was with Dropbox. I was primarily involved in go-to-market, P&L, revenue planning teams, so always on the business side. Um, I come from the family of entrepreneurs, right, in my family, and that's something I've always looked up to it, right? Like, I mean, I have immense respect for any kind of entrepreneur, building stuff and doing things from scratch by themselves. So that kind of motivation was always there inside me. Uh, right, for most of us, COVID did something life changing in one way or the other for all of us, right? And it was really the COVID moment which allowed me to explore my entrepreneurial stint while all of us were locked at home and working from home and stuff like that. While people pursued different hobbies, right? I was like, okay, I mean, I cannot sit idle, right? Working just 9 to 5, and I could do more with my time because there's just suddenly more time available to each one of us. So I started a small business wherein I was importing COVID masks from China and I was selling it in the US. That went really well. And during that journey, conversation which I started to have with my co-founder Malika was like, hey, when I'm selling these or doing a small trade, conversations are all over the place, and I'm not able to organize everything in one place together. So we said, you know what, let's build an AI powered CX platform for SMBs. Somehow, how do we give Zendesk kind of power or superpower to SMBs, like small businesses? So that was the first moment where we felt that there's a need because I had a problem. And again, COVID gave us all the time we needed to build stuff, right? And we started building and we launched the product, right? And as we grew the business, lately we realized that the use case for our product has evolved, and the same product which we built to solve CX problem for SMBs has now moved into solving for high volume recruitment. Because at the end of the day, the fundamental problem is same. You have a big funnel, right? Whether it's clients or your candidates, you have to move them through the funnel fast, efficiently, and make sure the cost of acquisition, that's your customer or your candidates, comes down drastically. And at the same time, the velocity at which you move to the funnel moves fast. So while we had the core technology built out, we are actually going through a pivot right now as a business, and we are focusing heavily on solving for high volume recruitment for large scale enterprises like contact centers. So that's my story in short. I'm based in Bay Area, in San Francisco area. Now, how my family reacted to it 100%. I think entrepreneurship builds a character and it shows you the real face, of everyone in your life. You really get to understand people better. And I would say family is something, it's truly a blessing when you embark on something because um, I did not draw any paychecks for the first 2 years when I was, in my started the business. And obviously, I mean, I could survive with whatever I had saved and all that stuff. But it's very important for our families, also in South Asian culture, right? Like to kind of embrace that and kind of be okay with it. Okay, you know what? You're doing something you believe in, you're enjoying it. We are there for you, and we are here to support with whatever you would need. So don't worry about the food and shelter, that's covered, but focus on what you're doing. So very, very thankful to family. Family comes first, and I think it's true for all of us in our life. Whatever we have been able to achieve is because of the countless sacrifice of the family around us.
And I totally agree. Right? In entrepreneurship, a strong ecosystem of family, friends, and well wishers is always a big differentiator. What about the name Bling? So is there a story around Bling?
Yeah, there is a
Yes.
story around Bling. So, as you know, right, when we first started the company, we were focused around solving for CX as a solution for mid-market businesses. And at that time, there was this song, I still listen to it a lot, Drake's Hotline Bling. You know, when that hotline bling. So, hotline, phone bling. So, we said, okay, you know what, we need to have something catchy. It needs to look young and people should remember it, right? So, uh, that was the story around why we chose the name Bling.
That's an interesting story. You're very passionate about recruitment and why it is a core strategic function, especially in contact centers. So talk to us a bit about it. Why do you believe so?
Right? Let's go one more level above, right? So you take any nation, right? Any nation on the planet. Of its economy is actually run on these blue collar workers or gray collar workers, right? Whatever you want to call it, right? And that is truly a function of how they get employed, where they get employed. It's a function of the labor markets in those countries, supply and demand. I'm sure you know this, right? And it really is the backbone of any nation. So let's just um, acknowledge that, right? The people we are talking about, they really are the backbone of any major economy on the planet. Because these are the people who are probably delivering your parcels at your door. These are the people who are serving you food at the counter. These are the people who are answering your phones, when you're calling for certain help or whatever it is, right? So they form a big part of any community, number one, right? Now, obviously, there are industry verticals like contact centers, like retail, like logistics, which engage routinely on high volume hiring. I mean, there is obviously seasonality ramp, we can talk about that. Then there's constant problem around attrition, which you also mentioned at the start of this show. So the multiple variables in this industry which affect how the acquisition engine today operates, and as a result of which what the opportunity lies for the industry in general to optimize for that, right? So that being said, our belief really is around how can we help these large scale enterprises who are engaged in high volume hiring do the same stuff a lot more efficiently, resulting in a lot more better cost per hire and time to hire. And why is it important for them? Because if you see in these industries, employment or hiring is not just a cost center discussion, it's a revenue discussion. For example, if contact center need to sell more minutes to its clients or more coverage to its clients, it needs people. And of course, that leads to higher billings and so on. So there is a revenue impact, right? So each person can be attributed to an incremental revenue for those companies. Similarly, in retail, if you want to launch more stores, you need more store workers. So you can have a direct attribute to the revenue. So the point I'm trying to make here is, particularly for high volume recruitment, while of course it adds to the cost basis in these companies, it also directly correlates with the revenue or incremental revenue which these headcount can bring. And if you understand that part, right, it should no longer be treated like a recruitment should no longer be treated like a policing function in these companies, right? Because over there is a lot more impact on the company's overall P&L, overall growth strategy, and all that stuff, right? So I think it's time for recruitment, especially for high volume recruitment, to go through a massive transformation. across industries, right, which employs high volume workers. And I think this is the time for it's ripe for disruption, right?
You're right. Every agent departure, approximately, anywhere from say 8 to 14K of replacement cost. And I'm talking more of the US market. If I'm taking 35% turnover, right, and a 200-seater contact center on the high end side, it's almost $2 million annual impact just on the cost side. Are you seeing the way the leadership in these companies is changing their thinking about hiring, where they are moving from it being a transactional function to more as a strategic differentiator?
Absolutely, 100%. And I'm seeing it across industries again, right? The thinking at the leadership level is definitely being driven around how we can treat recruitment as a business function, right? Instead of it being a supportive function and all that stuff, right? So the entire narrative in these rooms, in C-suite rooms, is actually happening around if there is a way we have been if there's a way we have been doing recruitment over the last 20 years or so, right? It has mainly be around seeing it as a policing function, right? Like there is a recruiter who is taking a lens and figuring it out whether this person is pass or a fail, right? How do you add objectivity to that process? How do you put rubrics which are so standardized that even a score of 1 on 5 for a specific question is clearly defined and there is no ambiguity around it? How do you put the system in place wherein uh, the the volume or the ramps are no longer a problem, right? And that's where technology comes in, transformation happens. And obviously, for these companies, from a net outcome standpoint, it leads to better cost per hire and hence resulting in better net operating
And
income.
if you see, where do you see the biggest bottlenecks or drop offs in this typical hiring workflow?
So it happens across different stages, but the most important one, right, is when you actually move the candidates from, let's say, screening to assessments and all, because it generally takes about 30 minutes for them to complete it, right? And people being people, even I might lose interest, right, if I'm going through a certain funnel and, I just have to do this thing and all that stuff. Second drop off happens due to the lag which exists between a recruiter to manually confirm a certain next step or answer certain questions, right? It creates an unnecessary friction in the entire recruitment process, right? So again, each stage can lead to certain fall off. There is a degree by which it changes. And needless to say, even at the from offer to joining, there are drop off which happens there as well because these candidates weren't kept warm all throughout the remaining 15 days or 20 days from offer till this joining, right? So it happens across stages, but again, you will see patterns based on industries, kind of roles where you're seeing the drop off. Here is my thesis, right? Shopping as a consumer has become insanely easy, right? I'm sure if your wife needs something for the home, you won't even bother. You'll take out your phone, you go to Amazon, it probably takes you 30 seconds to place the order, right? And it's done, right? And as humans, we all have adopted that kind of habit, right? Today, if you now just keep this experience aside for a second, now imagine recruitment. I'm a candidate. I go to a job site. First thing you'll ask me is this big of a form. You've already bored me to my death, right? Like fill this big form and then take this, and then there's an email which comes in, I miss it, and all that stuff. So there's a lack of engagement. There is the way forms. I think we should kill forms across the globe. I'm of the camp forms are waste of time. Right? So there are elements in the entire process which shouldn't exist anymore. It doesn't make sense. All these elements add to some kind of drop off, which of course compounds as you go through the funnel. The right way to look at it is like how to reduce friction and make recruitment just like how you shop on Amazon. I mean, that's how I see the world in front of me.
It's an interesting comparison you just did to shopping, right? To shopping online, versus recruitment. And I know from all our personal experiences, either as an applicant, it irritates you, when suddenly, it directs you to a form, where you have 10 steps and you have to build it out. And
Exactly.
you're like, I don't even want to bother, talking to this company. Because if you look at the high volume industry, high volume hiring industry, be it contact center or retail or logistics, which you talked about, there is a generational change that has also happened. That expectations have shifted. Your traditional models or recruitment systems have not. Is it just a technology issue or is it also a process issue?
That's my favorite question. I think it's a process issue. It's a mindset issue, right? I'm sure when you and me applied for our first jobs, we were quite okay to go through these lengthy forms and wait for people to respond and, take that 3, 4 weeks of back and forth. We were okay with that, right? It's a generational shift. We are dealing with a generation which is spending more time on TikTok and Instagram. That's where they're hanging out, right? They like to get things done fast. Conversations have replaced with emojis, right? So that kind of shift has already happened, right? Whether we accept it or not. That's the reality, right? Now, given that, and this is the workforce which is going to get employed in these sectors, right? You have to find creative ways of how do you leverage technology to engage them at the channels where they are. So when you say mobile first, this is how I think mobile first means they are probably on these apps and all that stuff and engage with them right there and take them through the funnel, whatever it is, right? From those platforms, right? And that's exactly one of our core missions too, right? How do we engage with the candidates where they are? For example, if you're a candidate in the US, probably spending time on Instagram and TikTok, right? You'll be present there. If in Latin America, you're probably on WhatsApp. If you're in India, you're on WhatsApp, right? So again, depending upon the region you are, you need to be there where the candidates are, just like how contact centers have done it for the customers, for customer experience. The same thing, it's the same exact concept. Instead of a customer, now you're treating your future employees as your customers and then providing them the same kind of experience and then have them go through that funnel and the process. But for all these things to happen, there needs to be a reset in the thinking at the C-suite level that we are no longer going to see recruitment as a policing function. We are not in the business of rejecting people. We also acknowledge that human decisions are never perfect. We also acknowledge that human decisions can have certain inherent bias from my own experience. While acknowledging this, let's change the thinking around how do you make recruitment for high volume hiring similar to shopping online or make it more objective, make it frictionless so that way from application to hiring or onboarding, that timeline can be reduced massively. And that will save a ton of uh, resources for the company. It will bring down the cost per hire. And obviously, you're going to give an awesome candidate experience. So that way they refer the company more to their friends, like, hey, I just started and I got a job offer in like 24 hours or whatever it is. So I think process starts first, the thinking starts first, and technology will do once everyone is aligned.
How do you see the advances which are happening today? With the fast development of the LLM models, and other
Mhm.
advances. How do you see that changing this whole process value chain?
Right. So definitely, AI is helping in a way we had never imagined in our life. We are seeing things already changing right across whatever we are touching right now, right? So as recruitment. Now, obviously, in the context of high volume hiring, um, our learning has been that the person you are hiring for these kind of jobs, right? Uh, a lot can be handled via objectivity of the process, right? So what AI does really, really well is it sticks to the objectivity of the problem, right? And when I say objectivity, to give you an example, AI, you're going to ask these 5 questions to the candidate and you're going to assess the candidate on these 10 parameters. Here's a scorecard. 1 means this, 2 means this, 3 means this, 4 means this. And it's going to do that relentlessly without putting any other thought on top of it. So there's objectivity which gets met, right? And that's the beauty of AI, right? And it does it at scale with 100,000, 200,000 people and everything, right? Obviously, it helps companies to reduce bias in the selection process and inherent bias, right? All that kind of stuff, right? So it works beautifully when objectivity needs to be met, and it does that job really, really well. That's part one. Part two, it can also drive a lot of predictive work for the companies, such as predicting, what's the likelihood of turnover of this specific candidate, because you definitely don't want to hire a candidate who churns within the first 2 weeks, because you just lost all the time, resource, efforts, whatever you did, right? And it happens a lot in these
Yeah.
industries, right? So predicting the likelihood of this candidate to stick within that job which is being offered within that company and that location, right? Based on certain parameters, historical data, performance, and all that stuff. That is also something AI can do really well and in real time, right? So that way you're not again going back to using human judgment to figure out thing this person's taken. No, you don't think. You put objectivity to it, you put data back to it. Based on the data AI can predict. Of course, it will never be 100%, but 80% is good enough. Let's call it, right? I mean, if it can do 80% of the time, it meets the result. So adding objectivity and adding more advanced predictions in terms of what it thinks can happen beyond the tangibles, right?
Yeah. And my follow-up question results in a higher employee experience, and then how does that eventually translate into maybe a better retention or a better customer experience? Have you guys done any study around that?
I can share initial findings are there with us. We
Yeah.
are seeing definitely as a result of this end-to-end transformation, we are also targeting beyond objectivity aside. We are also providing a great candidate experience. So this means a candidate doesn't need to wait for 3 days, 2 days just to get an answer, right? It's happening in real time. Everything is instant. It's happening right then, right? So candidate is excited. He or she feels engaged from day one, all the way till the onboarding, right? And in fact, we're having deeper conversations with some of our partners too. Like, okay, how can we extend it beyond the onboarding? Can we go deeper into the employee life cycle now, right? Once they're already onboarded, right? They might have questions after that as well. Once you provide a better engagement to your employees, to your team members, obviously they will perform better. Uh, it also does good things for the companies in terms of uh, finding or detect early signs of failovers in the process, because what you're trying to achieve is shorter cycles, faster throughput, right? And that process you're able to figure out, okay, what can work, what cannot work. So you're able to skim out the applicants before even it's too late, right? So in terms of engagement, which we think they deserve, once you do that, and the net outcome in terms of how these employees ultimately provide the kind of services to your customers and to their customers, right? Definitely we have seen some early signs of improvement there, NPS or whatever you want to call it.
So in essence, what you're saying is there is no talent problem. It
There's
is
no talent
a
problem.
process, mindset, and a systems problem.
Exactly. You're spot on.
Okay. And then that is what you guys are trying to address. So if I was to say, hey, if you're linking, your customer employee experience, your employee experience actually starts much before that, even your employee.
You're spot on. You're so right, right? Like solve for employee NPS, your customer NPS would be solved, right?
Yeah.
And that
And
starts
what you're
from day
solving
one.
for is not even, it's someone is not even my employee yet. So you start the experience equation. You're just like you would engage a customer in their journey when they're just researching about a product. Here
Yeah,
you are the product. So you're just enabling that experience better for someone who's considering you for employment.
absolutely right. It adds to the brand narrative of the company as well, right? Like how you position yourself out there in this fiercely competitive industry, right? Where everyone is skimming from the same pool of resources.
And have you seen a change or differentiation on how various geographies or various demographics relate to this? Or what you're talking about is largely applicable, across the globe, across demographics?
So right now, to give you some context, we are doing this across 5 different regions across the globe. The results are kind of similar. When I say engagement levels or the satisfaction scores, it's kind of similar. It's just the cadences and the channels where we engage with the clients changes based on the regions, right? For example, obviously, if you're operating or hiring candidates in Latin America or in India, you're going to be more active on WhatsApp, end of discussion, right? Similarly, if you're in Philippines, you're more engaged on Viber because the economy runs on Viber in Philippines, right? If you're in the US, text message or phone calls, right? I mean, that's the way you're gonna engage. So and I'm keeping emails aside because emails is a given, right? Emails, yeah, sure, but we all know emails. Nobody reads. Even I don't read my emails all the time, right? Text message, I'm gonna read every single text message. I'm gonna read every single WhatsApp or whatever it is, right? So from an engagement standpoint, the channel changes. But principally how you engage with the candidates, more or less, it remains the same, but where you engage with them, that's an important factor.
And so over the years, we have seen a lot of incremental innovation, over things, in the entire, I would say, recruitment function also, right? There are companies, which are focused on assessment. There are companies, which are focused on, uh, specific hiring, psychometrics, and others. And yet, when I talk to you, you say, hey, this is the right moment to change because the conditions are right for that, breaking, all the previous thinking. Talk to me a bit more about that. Why do you say that? Because that's quite a bold statement, because what you're literally saying is what has happened so far is okay, but not game changing. Let's move to a new world.
Spot on. So thank you for bringing that up. See, the problem with these assessments or whatever it is you want to call it, right? They're static in nature. These are set of question and answer, which you and me grew up filling in our college things and all that stuff, right? There's a question, You answer right or wrong, you get points accordingly, right? The thing with AI, with technology, with LLMs is it's adaptive in nature. It changes its follow-up questions based on the previous response, right? It'll ask you more probing questions. It will even answer a qualifying question. If you're not clear about something, you can even ask, right? Now let's just recall one of those days when in our 10th grade and all, when we used to have those papers, if you're not clear about a question, we used to raise our hand, we used to ask the teacher in the class, like, I'm not clear about the question, right? And sometimes they will not even entertain it. No, whatever you understand, just write it down or whatever it is, right? So I think of it from that lens, right? Like static, you're not incentivizing people for being themselves through that format. With LLMs, with AI, you're actually engaging in a conversation, right? And then there are follow-up questions, and the follow-up question changes based on how you answered the last question. And the candidate can also interview the AI, can ask all the questions, right? And that's how you want a healthy conversation to look like, right? I'm not testing you that you're perfect or not. All I'm trying to find out, are you a great fit for our job, for the job you're offering? That's what I'm trying to assess, right? So that's why I said this is the moment, right? We have the technology. Let's assume the process wise, the stakeholder alignment is there, right? Then what are we waiting for? The days for static assignments or static forms. Again, forms of any kind, which is static in nature, is done. It's game over, right? Should not exist. Now, with with LLMs, the beauty is every conversation you have with the candidate, right? You can record it, and not only you can record it, you can transcribe that conversation, and based on transcription you can even run analytics on top of it. You can go as far as getting a CFR score on top of that conversation because you have the voice packets, you have transcription. All you need to do is run advanced analytics on top of it, get sentiment of the conversation, get a tone of the conversation, right? Again, we learned all these things while doing the same thing for CX, right? Now the thing is how to take the same template and apply it um, for candidate conversations, right? And then go from there, right? So
I like your analogy. I think you hit the nail on the head when you say we are basically reaching out and having a conversation with a potential employee about fitment to a role rather than a pass or a fail to a certain static grid. What will be your advice to the leaders, who are hesitant to adopt new technology? Okay, just because it's a cost line item, they're like, hey, let it go. Maybe we'll optimize the process a bit, take out some juice from that instead of going through another big technology implementation, with a lot more costs upfront.
oh, that's a good point, right? And again, it starts with the nature of the industry, the company, right? How they're structured and all, right? So right now we're focused on solving this problem for either publicly traded companies or companies where there's a heavy vesting of private equity players because they're naturally incentivized to push for efficiencies, improve their free cash flow, right? So the moment you see a private equity backing a company, right, what's on top of their mind. You want to improve their free cash flow. That's the goal, and management is actually incentivized to improve that so that the valuation markup happens, right? So that part is very clear in our mind. So we are not yet talking to private companies and privately held companies. The conversation now becomes more objective in terms of, okay, how we are going to help you reduce, again, specifically cost per hire and time to hire. And there is a reference point which they already have. And how do we work together? We as technologists, we as engineers, right? And you as business owners, how do we work together to take it from, let's say, cost per hire to $200 cost per hire? And obviously, cost per hire calculation is very simple. How much money do you spend as a company on a recruitment as a function across the different business lines or whatever? And that includes everything, your cost you spend on advertisements, your fairs, job awareness campaigns, right? Obviously, recruiters, office space which you need to operate that. So there's a lot of cost elements involved there, right? So once you have that number very clear, you set a goal, and once the management agrees to it, you work along with them, right? You work together as partners. The first step is always to find a sponsor there who believes in this, who believes in change management, who believes in transformational impact in the companies. And it's a hard job, definitely, because there's a lot of buy-ins which needs to happen from operational leaders because they've been doing same stuff for the last 10, 20 years. But once you do this buy-in, once you work with this sponsor in the company, um, things become easy. And that's my biggest learning so far.
And then I know you guys are still quite young as a company, but as you're planning your next, I won't say 5 years, I'd say, because the change is happening so fast, over the
Yeah.
next 18 months or 2 years, how are you envisioning the future of the recruitment process per se? How do you see that changing? What are the new metrics of measurement which you think where will people be looking at?
New metric, you mean to say from business side, right? How business going to be measuring the
Business
new
side,
metric?
right? See, today you look at, okay, what is my time to fill? Okay, what is my cost per hire?
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
but we talked a lot about experience. We talked about hey, what is the candidate experience? And a time to fill does not measure candidate experience. So
Yeah.
so how do you see any thoughts on that? In terms of how the future is
100%.
trending.
So there is this thing which I keep saying around. I think applicant NPS becomes a new North Star for the companies, right? How satisfied were they from start till finish of the entire recruitment process? And just like how in our industry we religiously measure the customer NPS after every call, after every ticket, whatever it is, how do we religiously measure the applicant NPS, applicant or employee NPS until they become employee, right? And I'm sure you have systems to track when they're employees, but when they're applying, when they're applicants, right? Because they might not join you today. They might join you after 6 months or a year, right? But they're still a good prospect pipeline for you, right? So once you're able to measure that, I think this will drive more innovation from a technology standpoint, process improvement and stuff like that. So applicant NPS could be one of the metric which I think of on top of my mind, in addition to the hard metrics around cost per hire.
I like that. I think applicant NPS will become more and more important. Okay. No, this has been quite an interesting conversation. Kish, I took quite a few takeaways for companies, and our listeners, on how do you rethink the experience before someone becomes an employee. I think to me that's the biggest takeaway. Any parting thoughts, for our listeners? Any advice for the budding entrepreneurs?
The advice I would say, the only advice I have is just listen to one person when you're building a business, and that's your user. Be heavily obsessed with them, be heavily obsessed with their metrics, know their numbers by heart, like what would make them look successful. And if you can solve for your customers, if you can solve their hardest problem and help them win every single day, I think you're doing the right thing, right? And we have also done that over and over again, getting obsessed with our customers and their success. I think that's the only thing which matters. Everything else, like motivational speak or advice, that doesn't add a lot of value. But what really adds value, getting obsessed on your users, making sure they win every single day and they collect more money in their bank.
Okay. No, thank you, Kish, and thank you for making the time, to join us today. And for our listeners, the way to reach Kish, we will drop it in the comments, where you can reach out to him, either through LinkedIn. I know he's very active on LinkedIn, and then of course, their website link will be there. So thanks, and
Thank
have
you.
a good day.
Thank you, Abhi. Thank you.